Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you watching us on the Portable TV app, which allows you to watch us at all times, no matter where you are, using your smartphone. So there is a gold rush of sorts in Africa. Did you know that the world has recently awakened to the enormous potential of a continent which in the past was always seen kind of like as an also-ran? So what that means is the economic future for Africa probably bodes pretty darn well. But I want to go back, if I can, for just a minute, to Africa's past instead. You see, by the early 1900s, most of Africa, it was colonized. Maybe the better word is owned by mainly 7 European powers, right? It was Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. And as you can see on this map, they literally divvied it up. They just divvied Africa up into parts and then forced the people in those areas to adapt to their languages and their cultures while they exploited Africa's resources. It was a successful exercise in control through administrative domination. Now, since then, many regions of Africa have kicked out those guys, those colonizers, and they've gained their independence. And they're now being courted by the United States instead, by Russia, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia's nemesis, Iran, but most of all, by the Mac Daddy, China. China is expected to continue investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure in Africa. They're planning to build and announce roads, water treatment plants, communication systems, power plants, and a whole lot more. And you know, here's the thing about China. Here's the thing about China that is a differentiator, if you will. In Africa, it is not perceived as a threat. Why? Pretty simple if you think about it. It has no history there of exploitation or colonization. So why is that important? Why are we even talking about this on this day? Here's why. French President Emmanuel Macron has just come out and he's apologized to the nation of Rwanda for the harm that his country brought to the Rwandan people, including for France's role in the genocide that occurred in 1994 that resulted in the deaths of 250,000 people. But wait, today, this guy, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, he went even further. He's announcing that Germany is not only acknowledging and apologizing for its role in the genocide that took place in Namibia in 1904, Germany is actually going to offer reparations for its colonial past with a commitment of more than $1 billion that's going to be paid out over the next 30 years. Imagine that. Imagine that. So here's the question. Are these former colonizers truly contrite? Do they really feel bad about what they did and that's it? Or are they just waking up to the economic reality of China's increasing role, if not dominion, of investments in Africa? Where else are you going to get this story? Nowhere, but here on the News with Rick Sanchez, because we do believe it's time to do news again. So as you watch this newscast, we think you're going to have some questions that could possibly come to mind. For example, European countries are apologizing to African nations for colonization, but to what end? We're going to do a deep dive into that. Is it fair that Microsoft and Apple are not allowing repairmen to fix their products? More expensive for you, right? Also, more people worldwide are smoking. Really? Where? And why? All right, let's get right into this topic of Africa. China and the horrible history of European colonization, as we learned this week that both France and Germany are saying we are sorry for what we did, and may soon follow with a famous ex-lover's request, will you take me back to Africa? Here with more on this most fascinating story is correspondent Alex Mihailovich.
Approximately a century after the end of African colonization began to take place, some European nations have admitted their misdeeds. For example, in 2013, the United Kingdom apologized to Kenya and a list of other nations where it set up camp. And now, Germany has done the same with Namibia. In fact, it's gone a step further. Germany has admitted to taking part in a genocide in Namibia and has agreed to pay for its past.
And as a gesture of recognition of the incalculable suffering that was inflicted on the victims, we want to support Namibia and the descendants of the victims with a substantial program amounting to 1.1 billion euros, and this will focus in particular on rebuilding and development.
Germany admits nearly wiping out the Herero and Nama tribes during a rebellion against German colonial forces. It is estimated that 65,000 of 80,000 Herero perished between 1904 and 1908, while half of an estimated 20,000 Nama people died during the same period. In much more recent history, we saw a genocide in Rwanda, where in 1994 over 800,000 people were killed. This past week, during a visit to the nation, France's President Emmanuel Macron stopped short of apologizing but admitted that France bears some of the responsibility for the genocide.
France didn't understand that by wanting to interfere in a regional conflict or a civil war, it was de facto staying by the side of a genocidal regime. By ignoring the alerts from the more lucid observers, France was then bearing a devastating responsibility in a spiral that resulted in the worst, whereas it was trying precisely to avoid it.
Like with other European states, France has been trying to repair its relationship with some African nations. While the endeavors may seem noble, some say there's more to it. Africa remains resource-rich, and Europe still wants a piece of the pie. At the same time, China is a threat to European powers on the continent, as it takes a foothold in Africa. The country has been a key player in Africa's urbanization push, with a large percentage of infrastructure projects being driven by Chinese companies and/or backed by Chinese funding. Many say it's a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims at strengthening political, economic, and strategic ties with countries in Africa and beyond. China has also been helping the continent with the COVID-19 crisis.
China actually has been providing vaccine aid to nearly 40 African nations through donations and sales at favorable prices.
Africa is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, and everyone wants a part of it. With little negative history on the continent, it's not out of reach for China to win hearts and minds. As for some Europeans, it is critical for them to make up for their colonial pasts if they want to be considered in Africa's future. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Gerald Horne is a professor of history at the University of Houston. He writes, teaches, and thinks about this topic every day of his life. George Galloway is a former UK MP. So let's talk about this with these two gentlemen. Gerald, I think I have to start with you based on your knowledge of this topic. Would you say that what you're seeing is heartfelt by these European nations, or are they simply reading the writing on the wall and seeing that other countries are going into the place that they used to have dominion of?
It's certainly the latter. Keep in mind that it's not only China that France and the United States and Britain are worried about. It's also Turkey, which is playing an increasingly significant role in predominantly Muslim areas of Africa, including areas once colonized by France. I'm speaking of the region stretching from Mauritania on the west all the way across the continent through Mali, where France now has troops, through Niger, Chad, etc. Secondly, as your setup piece suggested, Africa is en route to becoming the factory floor of the world. It's not only the fact that China is investing in infrastructure, you also have Chinese entrepreneurs and state-owned corporations who see that wages are rising in China, and increasingly they're moving their enterprises into places like Ethiopia. Then I would say that there is a reparations movement. That is to say, descendants of the African slave trade, such as myself, headquartered in the United States, along with powerful bodies like the Caribbean community, that is to say Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, not to mention the African Union headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, are pressing the United States and the North Atlantic powers for reparations. And I don't think you can understand what Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, announced with regard to Namibia without understanding this pressure that is calling for reparations. However, with regard to Germany, it may be too little, too late, because many of the affected communities in Namibia, that is to say the Herero people and Nama people who were subjected to genocide, feel that Berlin has not spoken to what they consider to be the critical question, which is land. That is to say, even in 2021, a disproportionately overwhelming percentage of the land in Namibia, which is as large territorially as California and Texas combined, is controlled by descendants of German colonizers, not to mention latecomers from the Afrikaner community in South Africa. So this issue will continue to percolate, I'm afraid to say.
Wow, this sounds like a 10-part series. George Galloway, I want to bring you in here. You are talking to us from the British Isles. As you well know, you may be, or your country may represent, if not being the queen, certainly, if not the king, certainly the queen of colonization. Do you believe that your people today, your country, should somehow give some kind of repatriation, some kind of assistance to these countries that your descendants colonized?
Well, if this reparations business catches on, Rick, we'll be bankrupt, because Germany actually was only an African colonial power between its formation in about 1870 until its defeat in the First World War in 1918, while Britain was colonizing a third of the world for centuries. And I'm with the professor on this. I'm entirely cynical about these apologia that we are now being treated to. As the professor said, and I'll give you the number, 80% of Namibian land, now 30 years after liberation, is still owned by Germans. 80% of an African country. If you begin to calibrate the looting of Africa carried out by the United Kingdom, by France, perhaps most brutally and licentiously by the Belgians, imagine. Little Belgium owned the Congo, killed 10 million African people in the Congo. And now, look, being brought up as a Catholic, Rick, we had a very bad attitude to Africa. We were told to give a penny for black babies. We were told that Africa was a basket case. Turns out, Africa is a treasure trove, and now everyone wants a piece of it. But these former colonial powers are carrying the albatross around their neck of the great crimes that they committed in Africa in centuries gone by.
Wow, you gentlemen know this topic, and I thank you both for sharing your perspective on this. This is a really fascinating story. I think you can expect that we're going to be spending a whole lot more time looking into this, because I think it's one of the things that all citizens of the world should focus on. My thanks to you both. Thanks once again. This is The News with Rick Sanchez.